I am so glad you could join us. I'm your host, Gawdat. This podcast is nothing more than a conversation between two good friends sharing inspiring life stories and perhaps some nuggets of wisdom along the way. This is your invitation to slow down with us. Welcome to Slow Mo. Today's guest is an expert in a topic that we sometimes avoid talking about openly. Michaela Boehm is an expert in intimacy, relationship, and sexuality. I first heard about her when I was watching a Netflix documentary called Unwell. And in the documentary, it was talking about intimacy between couples, among many, many other challenges that face our health and mental health in the modern world. Honestly, not a documentary that I recommend, by the way. But she was the only one that really made sense, I think, in that episode. And so I tried to reach out to her, and I realized that her body of work centers around the intersection between intimacy and embodiment, and that she has more than 30,000 hours of in-person counseling. So she would work with an individual or a couple one-to-one to try and uncover the challenges they have with intimacy. She has a clinical experience in trauma and addiction, and she worked with celebrity couples, and her work has been featured in print publications, TV programs, talk shows, and so on. She published a book. She put all of that together and published a book that was called The Wild Woman's Way in 2018. And so, as I said, the topic of intimacy and sexuality is a topic that we normally avoid addressing head on. But my intention today with Michaela is to dive deep and hopefully ask some of the questions that you truly want to ask, and maybe open up to a few discoveries that might make the life of couples a lot happier. So I am really grateful that you took the time. And is it Michaela Boehm? So is it bist du out of Deutschland or
I'm Austrian,
Österreich?
but people in the States say Michaela. They don't
Michaela,
know how to
okay.
say Michaela, so they say Michaela, and that's how everybody knows me.
So I'll tell you openly, now I understand. Because the first time I came across your work, I was watching a documentary on Netflix. Let's say I actually don't remember the name, but let's say it was a bit new agey, right? So everyone was like, saying things that are not really substantiated. And then you showed up in the documentary and you were like, look, here are the facts. Right. And I was like, I like that. This is, it's a sensitive topic, but to talk about it logically with facts is quite an interesting way of doing it. So that comes from the Germanic background, isn't it?
Yes, I don't consider myself Germanic because, of course, if you come from that part of the world, right, there's very strong differences between the Austrians and the Germans.
I agree.
As both the Austrians and the Germans will be happy to point out at all times.
Okay. Yeah, but both are quite facts-driven.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Definitely, I grew up with a focus on things making sense and a rational mind and quite a love for the scientific and all of that. Yeah,
I love that. But then you spent more than 20 years being an intimacy coach. I mean, you coached some of the most famous celebrities, Gwyneth Paltrow, I heard, and Will Smith, which is the one male on the planet that I'm most jealous of. I think he's funny and smart and handsome. I'm like, what's wrong with me? Anyway, but so what is an intimacy coach?
Well, I mean, that's mostly something that has happened in the press, the intimacy coach piece. I work on the intersection between, let's say, relationship, embodiment, and sexuality. And in that intersection, there is, of course, one of the things that shows up immediately is, are you intimate with your own body? Are you intimate with your own needs? Are you intimate with the sensations in your body? Can you listen to the messages that you're receiving and integrate them into your conscious mind, so to speak, right? And then, of course, from there, there's intimacy with another. And intimacy is not necessarily sex, right? That it's the
Totally.
ability to meet someone where they are, right? Meet ourselves where we are and meet someone else where they are. And that's not always easy.
Hmm. As a matter of fact, that's almost becoming a phenomenon in our modern world, that it's almost always difficult. I mean, it's rarely ever easy, isn't it?
No, not anymore.
Tell me more.
and less so now with all the social media, and of course less so now that we're all in lockdown, and things of that nature. But I think in general, even before, I'm in the fortunate position of having done this so long that I remember the time before everything was happening on Instagram or Twitter or
Mm,
places like that, right? And so even then, for people to really be with their own emotions, sometimes very strong emotions, positive and negative, mind you. It's not only with
mm,
positive. Some people can't be with their partner when it's really good either, meaning it's too much, right? They fuzz out, they
mm,
kind of
mm,
start giggling, they go away in their mind. So actual physical connection, physical, not necessarily touching, but physical in one space with a person, looking into their eyes, speaking with them, listening with them. That's not exactly something we're taught. Some of us
mm,
were fortunate enough to have good parents who instilled those kind of things, and you learned them by observing them. But many people have never been given that much open, available space,
mm.
where somebody else listened to them and really looked at them and really connected with them and really felt who they were. And that's very compelling. And if somebody knows how to do that, it's very wonderful for the relationship, of course. But it's also very wonderful for their general well being because their experience gets so much richer.
In a way, it seems to me that we as humans require that, almost need that for our well-being. And that intersection is actually quite interesting, the way you mention it, because embodiment is really sort of your relationship with yourself, right? And the idea of overlapping that with your relationship and sexuality is sort of like you have to build a relationship with yourself first before you build a relationship with another, so that you end up in a place where there is sexuality. I mean, is that the way you see it?
Close, yes. I would certainly
Mm-hmm.
say that's an accurate description, right? Embodiment, contrary to what a lot of people see as embodiment, how we look at embodiment is essentially the ability to hear the messages of the body, right? Be intimate with the sensations of the body. And within that, of course, not everything's positive, right? You're not always going to feel really lovely when
Mm-hmm.
you're embodying, meaning when you're allowing yourself to feel your body and feel the messages of the body. Because, of course, if you don't listen to them, there's like a sediment of negative stuff. And if you've had trauma or grief or things like that, that's there too. And so embodiment and the ability to be with yourself is definitely the fundamental bedrock of being with anyone else, because how are you going to know what's happening in somebody else's body, all the way down to sex, right? Where, I mean, how are you going to know what somebody else's body is experiencing if you are completely numb to your own body? We pick up via mirror
Mm-hmm.
neurons and everything else what's happening in somebody else's body. So intimacy with yourself is the fundamental step in intimacy with anyone and anything, right? And sexuality, of course, in an ideal world, is born from the deep bodily wisdom and understanding that allows you to set proper boundaries, that allows you to open to a person if you want to, or not open to a person if you want to, that allows you to feel yourself, feel your partner. And then from there, there's other dimensions available, right? More emotional, psychological, spiritual dimensions available. That would be the ideal scenario. But of course, a lot of people know sex only as something that one does to kind of feel good, like one has a drink or eats a bag of chips. And
Mm.
there's a lot of longing for that depth of connection that, of course, most people intuit is there, or maybe they had it spontaneously or with somebody who knows how to do that. And so often there is, so to speak, fast food sexuality, and then there's gourmet sexuality, so to
Oh yeah,
speak.
yeah. Junk food. Let's call it junk food
Yes. Yeah.
junk sexuality and gourmet sexuality. Yeah.
Yeah, and also just good home cooking. There's nothing wrong with good home cooking, which is somewhere in the middle, right? Doesn't always have to
Mm.
be on the extreme ends of things. Sometimes it can just be good, but
Good and enjoyable and
and
wholesome. And
enjoyable. But
I spent 28 years with one woman in my life, and I definitely believe that if that connection is there, it's actually much better than junk food in so many
absolutely.
ways. It's
Yeah.
intimate, it's close, it's lovely,
Yeah.
and it's enjoyable in every possible way.
Yeah.
But that's not the common phenomena that we see here, right? I mean, most people sort of like within months or years at most, sort of lose the spark. Isn't that normal nowadays?
It is normal, or it is, let's put it this way, it's considered normal. And
Mm.
one of the reasons it's considered normal is because it's a big topic, right? And it's certainly one of the main things I deal with when working with couples. It's considered normal, but in an interesting way, even though it's considered normal, everybody thinks they can avoid it till it happens, and then they're very surprised that it
not
happens.
not
Not
me.
me,
That happens to
exactly.
other normal humans, but
Yes,
I'm not gonna
exactly.
suffer that.
And then there's no education around that. So then
Uh,
there's two avenues people take. One is resignation,
mm,
maybe a bit of upset followed by resignation, or substitution, meaning people start cheating or other kinds of stuff happens, porn or, whatever. They
mm.
open the relationship. I mean, you name it. But to understand that that's a normal progression of the relationship, and that there's actually tools around that, and that it's an opportunity to deepen the engagement and not to just seek the thrill somewhere else. That's not being taught, right? And also, I mean, these are skills. There's some skills to know, there's some education around that. It's not that hard to fix, actually. The problem is that people tend to want to fix it at the point where they have so much resentment and anger and disappointment built up that other things need to be dealt with. The mechanics of keeping the spark alive are pretty straightforward and easy. Oh, it's
That is a mega statement, Michaela. That is
yeah.
like that. Like we're gonna ask you to get to the stand now and explain what you just said. I mean, in reality, I think one of the biggest challenges in our world today is that people lose that spark sexually. I mean, in general, why do people break up? Huh? Either they chose wrong in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
But if they chose right, it's eventually what mostly sexuality, or it becomes stale. You love the person you're with totally from your heart sometimes, but without sex, it starts to go like, okay, as you rightly said, some people will go cheating or whatever, and that triggers, or it just becomes stale.
Yeah,
Like you
right.
you go through the everyday feeling that you have a buddy next to you, not a lover, not an
That's
intimate
correct.
partner, right?
Correct.
And so when you say it's easy to fix, prove it.
Okay, well, it's very easy to fix. But like I said, the caveat is you have to know what you're doing from the beginning, and
Mm.
not only attend to it when there's a lot of emotional
Resentment
resentment
already built
and
up.
baggage that has come from it, right? It's not that
Mm.
easy to fix, of course, once you've cheated and, things of that. Then all other aspects of relational difficulty come in. But so I'll give you a quick overview of how I work with it and how you can make sense of it. So, one of the ways that you can make sense of it is that when you look at sexuality, or meaning the attraction between two people, right? We sometimes call it erotic friction, which is a great term. I'll explain
Mm.
in a second. So, you have erotic chemistry or erotic friction with someone. And that is based on difference, newness, difference, excitement, unfamiliarity. So
Mm.
that's one area, right? Erotic friction. The other area, and those two areas get conflated all the time, is relationship. So relationship is built on resonance, on sameness, on similarity. So you and I don't know each other at all. So how we would establish relationship is we find commonalities. Right? If we would sit somewhere, we'd probably discover that we know some people in common, at least, in the social media world or whatever, right? Maybe we'd discover that we like the kind of music or we have a similar background or whatever, right? We read the same book recently. So we're going to connect as humans. And then, of course, this is also true when one connects romantically by finding commonality. And so the mark of a functioning long-term or medium range, however you want to say it, but the mark of a long-term, medium range, or even short-term, but very successful relationship is that you have common ideas, goals, political outlook,
spiritual alignment,
spiritual alignment, the way you look at money, children, no children, right? All of those things. The more aligned you are and the more commonality you have, the better your relationship. So
interesting.
So
so there is that conflict between them because one is saying, let's be more similar, but then by definition, there are no newness anymore.
Correct. So that's an easy fix, and I'll tell you why. But let me just talk about relationship for a moment, because when you get this, everything makes total sense. And I don't know why this isn't, known or taught as much.
Yeah.
Right? So a relationship problem is when you are not agreeing. So communication issues, you can't agree on where the kids are going to be raised. One is a vegetarian, one is is a meat eater, whatever. So relationship issues have to do with not being on the same side or on the same part of the rope, so to speak, right? When you have relationship issues, you must see a relationship counselor, right?
Okay.
Somebody who creates commonality again, or at least brokers a compromise or teaches you better communication so you're once again on the same side of the argument. That's relational fixes. Attraction or erotic friction issues are not relationship issues. They have to do with sexual attraction. So like you said rightly, the very things that make a relationship good are the things that make the sexual attraction go away. And so the normal course of a relationship, there's of course always, exceptions, and I'm making a very black and white argument here, just as a disclaimer. It's very subtle, but for the sake of the bigger argument, two people meet, doesn't matter if it's two men, two women, a man, a woman, doesn't matter, right? Two people meet, they like each other and they have strong spark. And now they start engaging sexually and it's really exciting. And at the same time, the beginnings of a courtship, it's like you have sex and then you talk about things that you don't know about each other, right? You have long discussions at night. There's so much to tell. It's really exciting. You don't know that person, so everything's fresh and new and the world is a sparkly, wonderful place, right? So then what happens is now you decide you want to take this further. So what then happens is you start establishing right? Commonality. Now you have your favorite place you go to eat. You develop like a ritual for your Sunday. You start introducing your romantic partner to your friends. Then you do things together. Now, eventually, the usual progression goes, then you at some point move in together. And maybe you'll have, get married or have children or form a business together. All of that happens. And it's two people coming closer and closer and closer together, ideally without much drama in the relationship, right? If it's a good relationship. And suddenly one fine day, you're sitting on the sofa in your matching sweatpants, eating out of a bowl of popcorn, watching your favorite TV show, right?
That you've watched for 5 times before.
And it's wonderful, but nobody wants to hang off the rafters having great sex, right? So, because you are now, like you said, buddies. Anytime somebody says to me, I married my best friend, the next thing they're going to say is, and we no longer have sex, right? Because that's what happens. You become buddies, you become partners, and that's good, mind you. This is the important thing to know. harmonious, positive, aligned relationship is hard to come by. You don't want to throw that away. But if you remember how it was in the beginning when you had the great, exciting sex, well, you were two different people. You haven't just folded in together. Not all your shit is in the same place. Not everything is a compromise, right? You don't get ready for your date night in the same bathroom, seeing each other brush, the teeth and, going out to dinner, talking about who feeds the dog next and all of that, right? That is the death of the erotic friction. Now, that's no rocket science. It's just something we forget, right? That what made it interesting is we were different people. So this is where a quick fix comes in, or the easy fix, I should say, not quick fix, easy fix. If you have discipline around not giving yourself up, around maintaining individuality, around spending some time apart, around not always touching randomly without any purpose or even consciousness, around muddling up, bill paying, huggy, kissy stuff, the kids and your business, you can maintain the eroticism long term. And I know people who've done it very successfully, but it does take discipline, and it takes a shift in your mind where you go, spending all your time together is not the best thing for the relationship. Always touching, not the best thing for the relationship. Discussing, who pays which bill while at a romantic dinner, death of the sex. This is no revelation to anyone if you really think about it. When you first go on a date, what do? Right? You go home, you dress yourself, you prepare yourself, you're excited, you've made a plan, you have things to talk about, you meet the other person somewhere, you don't fiddle on your phone while they're ordering their food, you're with them. Yeah, you ask them questions, you have interesting things to say about yourself. You designate the time to connect. Nobody talks about that the dog got sick earlier or that little Johnny has to be picked up from kindergarten in the morning. You don't do that on a date. So why suddenly is it okay to do it with your significant other? Well, because we are meant to believe that a good relationship means a good sex life. And if your sex life is no longer great, the relationship is in question.
So this is really interesting. This is almost like what we say about work and life, some kind of a work-life balance. So when you're at work, you're at work. When you're back home, you're back home. I think what you're trying to say here is there is a sex relationship balance, right?
Yes.
And so there are parts of the couple's life where they're all about relationship and taking care of the kids and, but then they need to carve out times where they're completely separate from this and engaged in that, again, the sort of discovery, if you want. But then I have to say, and I hope that doesn't come as differentiating, but doesn't boredom come in? I mean, they say that men are designed, at least during the old years, to look for as many mates as possible because that's the way to procreate life, right? And so there is still that instinctive part of a man. I'm more and more a believer that there is that instinctive part in a woman as well, by the way, that women also, now that the world is different and they don't need to be protected by this, male figure and so on, that this whole idea of maybe multiple partners and experiences and so on and so forth, that boredom, that variety, seeking variety, isn't that part of the equation?
Absolutely. Right. And it is said, and like you said, other things are happening in current times, which is why we always have to be very careful about the grand statement, right? But biologically speaking, when you just look at survival of the species, men are programmed to have sex with as many young, shiny, viable, healthy women as they can get their hands on, because that's how their DNA gets, projected forward in time. Women in the olden days, right? We're talking biologically, so I don't want to start some ideological war here. We're talking biologically, right?
Very sensitive topics.
Very sensitive topics, and rightly so. But, biologically speaking, women had to find somebody who could provide enough safety, food, and shelter so that the offspring a woman had with that person could live to adult life, right? Now, those are
Hmm.
some tough choices to make when you're in the caves or so, right? You have to find someone who has enough wherewithal to protect you and your children. And if you're pregnant and about to give birth, you do need that. Now, so those are the biological programming. So from a biological standpoint, women look for power, money, right? Resource. Men look
Mm.
for beauty, youth, and variety. That's always there, right? But of
Mm.
course, the same way we could say, well, human beings are programmed to eat as much as they can because that's what grants survival during a tough winter. And the more sweets, the better. Now, yes, that's true, but that's not an excuse to eat every bag of potato chips you can get your hands on, right? It's
Mm. Mm.
true. And when you know your biology, you can work with it. So certainly true that men get bored very easily with one woman, like a woman would get bored very easily with one pair of shoes. It's the exact same thing,
Thanks for the analogy. All
right?
right.
Yeah. So women want multiplicity of things and beauty and sustenance, right? That's really pleasing to us, right?
Hmm.
Why have one candle if you can have 30, right? That's part of the abundance of the fertility of the biology, right? And also
Mm.
there's other aspects to it. And men, of course, want multiplicity of flavors of women. So to tell a woman that for the rest of her life she can only wear one outfit in one color with one pair of shoes is like a life sentence. To tell a man that he can only be with one woman, right, for the rest of his life is also a life sentence. Now,
Mm.
but I'm saying all of this to say that that's only one slice of human existence, the biology. And we are a lot more than our biology, right? We're not
Hmm.
just driven by our biology. Some people are, but most of us have other considerations, one of which is the emotional consideration, pair
Mm.
bonding, depth of engagement with each other, the joy of having children together and creating a life together. That's a whole other
Mm.
layer that follows completely different rules,
Mm.
right? When you want to long-term engage with another human in a life partnership, shiny, young, and sparkly isn't the thing
Mm.
necessarily. You need somebody who is also reliable and can pull their weight when the going gets tough and is a good mother, and so on and so on and so on. So there's another layer, right? Then there's the societal layer. What's appropriate in your society so you're not getting pursued with pitchforks or burned at the stake or whatever, right? Like, so there's all
Mm.
these layers. Then there's spiritual considerations. So
Mm.
when we look at, yes, men are bored easily, and nowadays also women are bored easily because we are now afforded the same. That's why
Freedom.
it's not good to say men and women, right? You could say the male aspect in every human and the female aspect in every
I
human,
love that.
right?
Yes.
And that's a very different story than men and women, because we both have equal amounts of male and female, so to speak, meaning
Mm.
a part of us that wants to strive and succeed in business and get done and gets up on time and shows up on time, the parts of us that wants to be creative and emotional and enjoy foods and enjoy get-togethers. Men have that too, and women have
Mm.
the other part. So in the part that makes things happen in the world, there is multiplicity of other partners and stuff like that. In the part that engages with life as its fullest, there is depth and enjoyment of the bonding and stuff like that. And both can happen. So is it getting boring in the relationship just from a biology standpoint? Yes, absolutely. Right. And
Mm.
anyone who's had a successful long-term relationship will tell you that they had huge peaks and valleys of attraction and sexual engagement.
Mhm.
So in a long-term relationship, it's perfectly normal for that to go and then come back if it's a healthy relationship. But there's
Mm.
other layers that you can attend to. So what perhaps is no longer the sparkly, new, exciting thing now becomes a deeper exploration where your heart opens more, where you're actually
Mm.
having a depth of intimacy that can't be done in the second Tinder date or something like that. Right? It might be really exciting and it might feed you for a moment, but you're not actually able to have that depth of openness. And then there's, of course, spiritual dimensions to it, right? How you perceive yourself with a partner in the sexual domain, in the realms of spirit or the universe or whatever people call it, right? Like, meaning, how is your relationship serving a greater good in your children, in your community, in your political climate, whatever, right? So there's much, much bigger, I call that part of a spiritual, because it's outside of yourself. So those are engagements and those are pursuits that can be endlessly exciting and fascinating, and that take over from the thrill of the new flavor on one end. On the other end, and this is what you see because people intuit that and then they go at it sometimes in odd ways, right? When people start role playing or going to different hotels with different wigs or stuff like that, right? The background behind that is that in each human, there is different expressions or different flavors, right? And by the way, not only men like different flavors of women, like you can feel that like spices, women like that too. That's why all women like firefighters, or most women like firefighters. What did I see the other day that was just spectacular? Scottish men in kilts doing yoga. Why that's a flavor.
Okay.
Might not be a flavor I want every day, but
is this a new category on porn
it
channels
actually
now?
wasn't porn. It was actually something on the BBC, interestingly enough.
Wow.
Yeah. A huge. If you type in Scottish men's in kilt doing yoga, you will find these two guys. They have an Instagram account, everything.
Okay.
It's spectacular. Now, do I want that every day? No. For one, I wouldn't want to have to deal with ironing the kilts, if there's such a thing. But women like flavors too, right? And so there is no reason why within a long-term intimate relationship you cannot give your partner also different flavors. But that takes a bit of effort.
Hold on. This is a very, very, very important topic. So let me close on the topic before. So what I understood is you're saying there are so many layers to a relationship. One of them is the biological layer. And so instead of just chasing that biology, you might as well enjoy the other layers and make the biology work, right? And I have to say, I mean, I have this conversation quite a lot with my male friends, men friends, if you want, because the truth is, I enjoyed that very, very long relationship with my ex-wife, who's still my best friend. We're very, very close, right? And we spent 28 years together, and we were always in love, always passionate, and so on. And there is a joy to that. There is an incredible joy to the project that you built together, to the kids that you raised together, to the spiritual connection, exactly as you said. Huh? And then that comes, if you want, with a little bit of a price, which is no variety during that period. That's the agreement, right? And because of that, you make that relationship in itself the variety, right? But then you come to that concept of, some women want a firefighter, and, I'm not a firefighter, okay? And by the way, I think the more interesting question is that a woman who wants a firefighter sometimes, maybe perhaps not in my case, I tend to be very open in my relationships, but in general, a woman may not be willing to express those needs. There is that element of how do you open up as a couple and actually share your fantasies, share what you want from the relationship instead of looking for it elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, first of all, most women don't want the firefighter per se. Some women just like only firefighters, right? Well, that's pretty clear, right? But it's not the firefighter. And this is the important piece to understand in a long-term relationship is if you see, for instance, that your partner is really always into one kind of movie star, one kind of expression, right? What you do is you look at what does that signify. So firefighter, right? Firefighter is a great example because it's so clear cut. Courage, right? Unflinching courage in adversity, the willingness to put it all on the line for the life of others. A soft spot because there's kittens being rescued out of trees, right?
Okay.
A great attention to the body and fitness because that's important. The body is a tool for the purpose, and a uniform.
Why? Why do you like uniforms so much? I mean, I always wear black t-shirts. Does this count as a uniform?
Kind of, yes. It's
Okay.
a identifying feature, right? But
Hmm.
also a uniform in its very essence, it has a formality. And so what's interesting about a uniform, not all women like uniforms, but most women like uniforms, right? Is that the
Hmm.
uniform, well, first of all, it's a signifier, right? It is the signal of all the things I just described.
Yes,
So it
exactly.
loads up
It's a
as
brand.
that. Now, we don't know if all firefighters are courageous and take good care of their bodies. And, it's a trope, it's a signifier there. But the other thing is, most uniforms are extremely practical, well thought out, and they're functional yet formal, right? They fulfill a purpose. And that should give you an idea as in what women respond to in men, which is a purpose built
Appearance or
appearance,
representation.
right? And that's the
Yeah.
important thing, purpose built. Different things for different purposes. But that's the thing. There's something very unsexy about a guy who always wears the same shit no matter where he goes, right?
Mm.
Because it lacks distinction, it lacks refinement. And
Yeah, it sort of shows you don't put in the effort. You're not interested to show up.
yeah, or you are numb to the energetic subtleties that women are very.
Aren't most men numb to that
No,
subtlety? I
not
mean,
really.
mhm,
No,
mhm,
I would say that most men are finely in tune. They might just not know what to do about it, or don't care or don't want to, right?
that's a great statement.
And I think that is a very powerful thing, is when you for yourself can distinguish, I don't care, I don't want to, it's not important to me, right? So those are,
Mm.
because then you become empowered instead of kind of washing it all away in some, well, who cares, right? No, it's like, I don't care, or I don't want to, or
Mm.
this is not where I put my attention, right? This is,
Mm.
by the way, also when we talk about the multiplicity in men and stuff like that, it, how you work with that is not by suppressing it or thinking that's bad or toxic masculinity or whatever. It's by acknowledging it and then going, yes, and
Mm.
yes, of course, I'm attracted by a lot of different women. And having more than one woman is not conducive to the kind of life I want to live, morally, spiritually, just from a time constraint, drama quotient, right? Whatever, right? So
Mm.
you go, yes, and.
I love that, Michaela. This is so well said. So there's nothing wrong. We want to come back to the topic of men and women and the empowerment and so on. But I love the idea of, look, this is the truth of who I am, right? And I am putting in an effort, or I'm deciding, or I'm choosing to do something different that shows nobility, that shows commitment, that shows I'm in charge of things. I think that's wonderful. I also will say very openly, one of the things that I found in my relationships, not to generalize, but, there are certain times where women are maybe emotional, or there are certain times when certain things would trigger them. And, it's okay to own that. We're an emotional being. That's absolutely fine. Right. And by the way, I'm going to express my emotions and I'm going to let it out. And I expect you as my man to take charge of that. Right. And we have to work on being there. But let's go back to that point, because we started from how do we enable a couple to express their desire for variety, even if it's a little bit taboo, a little more openly.
Exactly. So the first thing you do is you go, like you said, yeah, I'm not a firefighter. Well, but you have firefighter qualities, right?
Mm.
So one of the things that you can do for yourself is, if you know that your partner has a certain preference of some sort, then you cultivate some of those qualities, not because you're not good enough otherwise, but as a gift. And also,
Mm.
what's wrong with having a wide range of expression, right? Same is true for women. If women can go beyond, oh, why does he look at that blonde? I'm not a blonde. I'm not good enough, right? That's a common trap. We have a tendency towards that. I include myself here, right? They're not good enough. It's a thing. It has to do with, selection and all kinds of stuff. So if you can go beyond that and say, Oh, it's just a different flavor. Yeah, you don't want pizza every day, all day.
Mm,
Oh, what does blonde mean? Oh, it's a cooling flavor. It's a flavor that's kind of a bit expanded and maybe a bit lighter and a bit happier, right? So as a like you look at that woman, he eyes and you go, what does she have that I don't have? And then instead of immediately getting all upset and aggressive and whatever, you go, oh, well, maybe it just needs a slight palate cleanser. So maybe I should lay off the intensity for a few seconds, right? So it's not
mm,
that hard to incorporate other flavors in our expression. And then, of course, when you
mm,
say if it's a bit risque or if it's a bit kinky or a bit weird, well, that's a secondary thing. The primary thing is that if you understand that we all need different things at different times, and you also understand that your partner isn't all those things, then on one end, you can healthily supplement some things that you don't need from your partner. So, for
mm,
instance, of course, sexually speaking, most people prefer to be monogamous, but emotionally speaking, or just from a visual entertainment standpoint, you don't have to do that all the time. So if
mhm,
you need a palate cleanser, you can watch a TV show, or you can go out with some friends, or you can engage in an activity that gives you some of the things that you're lacking. Because, for instance, if you never eat salt, you're going to get really craving for salt. But if you have a little bit of salt, it's probably enough, right? So
mm,
you learn how to healthfully expand your palate by doing it where you can. And then with your own partner, you just make an effort to switch things up. It doesn't even matter how, it's just that, right?
mm,
Dressed differently, go somewhere else. It might be so comforting to go to the same Italian restaurant every Saturday night. It is killing your sex life,
mm,
so it just is, right? And so now some
mm,
people don't care about that, but if you do get dressed in a different way, go somewhere else, take the initiative and do something separate. And sometimes you'll fail and it just sucks, and sometimes you will find that it's super exciting.
mm,
Read something that's outside of your normal expertise, talk about that. Try something else, right? So that's as far as the regular increasing the spark. Now, when we now talk about some sexual preferences of things that maybe you have a hard time expressing, well, one of the easiest ways to do that is to kind of point towards things that give a hint in that direction, right? So, I don't know, you watch a movie, somebody ties somebody up, right? And
mhm,
you can say to your partner, I've never done that. I wonder what that would be like. That's
mm,
kind of interesting to me. I mean,
mm.
if you're not able to say that in a relationship, you have some deeper things going on probably, right? Or if that's too much, you'll go, "Oh, that kind of felt exciting in my body," or something like that. You can be even subtler than that, but you point towards that. Most people take the hint. Most people are at least willing to experiment with their partner for the sake of the enjoyment.
Totally, but I think where the challenge really comes is sort of those markings of taboo, right? So a phenomena that we definitely I would love to talk about is 50 Shades of Grey, right? Where basically somehow you realize that this is interesting for a lot of women. Again, now that you talk about firefighters and so on, it's not the dominance act itself. I feel that what this Christian Grey or something, I don't remember his name, he represented something that women like, right? But then the idea of in their own mind, maybe not being able to express that to their husband, which is supposed to be familiar and long term and stable, you know what I mean? Then it becomes a desire in her that she's not able to express, or in him that he's not able to express to her because she's supposed to be the mother of the kids, let's say, right? And so it's the idea of those taboos. I think it starts from within us to say there is something, why do we consider that there is any part of this that is taboo? I always say that sexuality in general is weird, right? Everyone, which in every possible flavor in it, it's just not our normal being. It's not the way we are out in the world and, and interacting with life. So why are there certain parts of it that are considered to be more weird than others?
Yeah, well, for societal reasons and people's upbringings and things like that. And I certainly think that is a very big part of becoming an adult, right? That you
Mm,
reckon with your own sexuality and with the programming that is societal and really do some work around that. Because that also cuts down on prejudice and it cuts down on weird gender wars and all of those kind of things when you actually have an honest, truthful look at your sexuality in the context of what's expected versus what you want and things of
hmm
that nature.
hmm
And once again, that 50 Shades of Grey thing, it's not surprising that that's what women were into, because what it signifies is the relieving of one's responsibility, the relieving of one's agency for a moment of mindless surrender, so to speak, right? Now, not everybody wants to be treated like the woman in the movie, right? And not everybody wants a guy to treat her like that, because it's actually that is somewhat of a fast food version of the real thing. But
mm,
what there is the need for the relieving of the direction for a moment, right? It goes both ways. Men sometimes want that too. That's why men have those fantasies of the women laying them down and peeling their clothes off, and the guys can just lay there and are being serviced in some way, right? That's also very relieving because you don't have to work so hard at all times. And that's a
mm,
big piece in a sexual relationship, is when one partner always expects that the other does them, right? And stuff like that. So you could have whole explorations of wonderful sexual, play by splitting up responsibilities and saying, oh, tonight you're not going to do anything. You're just going to lay there, right? I'm going to take care of you, and the other way around. And all of those things can be explored amongst people, who love each other and who are willing to be a bit in exploration. And
mm.
it doesn't have to be that heavy. You could just buy a book with some, whatever, the joy of sex or something like that, right? A very middle of the road somewhat book. And pick a few things that you want to explore, put them on pieces of paper, put them in a, jar, pick one on occasion and go,
Yeah.
oh, let's try this. And then it's also not so awkward and embarrassing and fraught with all this horrible stuff, because
Mhm.
you're just exploring a thing that every human being does and wants to do. And we all came from that exploration. And if we have
Mm.
children, we made those with that exploration, right? So there is certainly a need to demystify and also deconstruct some of the, programming. But that's doable. I mean, we have enough nowadays, particularly, right? It's not like in the olden days where you had to hush hush go to some store and buy some magazine wrapped into some wrapper or whatever. If you wanted to see something that you didn't know about, you can educate yourself about everything in gory detail online. There's great educational stuff, there's great videos. And this is the other part of how do you keep the spark alive. And this is something that most people, don't like to hear. Learn some sexual skills, some new
Yeah.
sexual skills.
Yeah.
What's wrong with upping your repertoire from what you learned when you were 16, which
Yeah.
is what most people still do, right? When you did your first fumbling in the basement of your parents' friends, where you had a party or something. It's like, learn some new sexual skills, do it together, do it individually, find out about your own body, learn about your own pleasure,
Yeah.
explore your own pleasure, so you are more responsive to a partner because you actually know what's what. So developing some skills and actually, let's say, continued education in the sexual domain goes a long way to keeping the spark alive.
That is such a profound advice. It's a skill, right? You would learn to bake better, right? And baking better makes the couple happier, right? That's, I think there is part of it that is not a skill, but there are mechanics to it, right? There are things that are all about, just like we do in meditation, when you're on in your own body awareness, the awareness of your partner's sensations and feelings and likes, and right. And so I know you have to go. So I want to ask you one more quick question. And in a lot of what you're saying men and women are the same, sort of. Like, we assume the same roles. Do you believe that to be true? Is it true that it's obvious in 50 Shades of Grey, for example, that a woman wants to be taken, right? A man wants to take a woman. There is a difference there. Are we similar or are we different?
We are both, right? So I think first and foremost, we're humans and we should be treated as humans, free of all the labels. And within that, we should be able to unfold as the beings that we want to be, because that's ultimately the greatest gift we can give everyone around us. Now, that said, and I also believe that women should be able to do all the things men do, and men should be doing all the things women do, societally speaking. But now that means something else, and that's really important. Preference, right? So, of course you have preferences. And most women, not all women, but a lot of women have the preference to be taken sexually. But that doesn't mean we're the little housewives in the rest of our lives. And
I love that statement. Yes.
But because I like to be submissive sexually doesn't mean I'm going to be sitting at home baking all day. On the contrary, the more I'm out there in the world making my mark, the more I want to be relieved and taken. So my sexual preference, and the same with a man, right? Somebody taking charge of a sexual relationship or sexual engagement is, for the person who does it and does it well, is equally as enjoyable as the one who surrenders. Now, but that's a preference. It's a choice. It's what you like. Now, should you be able to go the other way on occasion? Yes, right? Just because it's good to be, but it's not your preference. It's like, I like black clothing. Can I wear other clothes? Absolutely. Do I? Not that often. On occasion, right? So I don't have dogma or ideology about my black clothing, and neither should I have dogma or ideology about my sexual preferences. And what makes a good relationship and what makes the relationship have good spark is that in the sexual moment, one person takes on one role, the other person takes on the other role. You have there's strong arc of attraction, of spark, of polarity, erotic friction, and then you have a fun, great, fulfilling sexual moment, and then you can go back to sameness. Right?
So it always goes back to that sex-life balance, if you want.
But when you look at how much life you spend living versus how much life you spend, then you have to see, right, that there will be certain things that are more important than others.
Yeah, and I think what's clear in this conversation is that both are important, both are separate, okay, and both require you to live them fully. So when you're in life, when you're having sex and you like to be taken or dominated, that's absolutely fine. When you're out there in the world, you don't have to say yes to everyone, right? You can absolutely take your stand, right? You can when you're with your partner and it's hot and steamy and fresh and new. That doesn't mean that once that is done, you can't go back to that idea of a balanced life and a predictable life. Michaela, I know you have to go. I wanted you to stay. We wanted another hour and a half, but I am so...
We can always book another time.
We should definitely do that. I loved our conversation. I think it's lots of eye-opening, even though when you hear them, you go like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, kinds of remarks. And I hope you have inspired and maybe changed the lives of a few thousand today.
Let's hope for that.
Oh, that was really interesting. Sex-life balance. I'm coining that term. This is a term that I think we should use in understanding how we can keep both active, engaged, and alive. Before you go, I remind you to help me push this message forward by rating this podcast 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Please find me on social media. Tag me as you share with others. Tell others what you learn. I'm Mo_Gawdat on Instagram. Mo Gawdat on LinkedIn, M Gawdat on Twitter, and mo.gawdat.personal on Facebook. I love you all for listening, and I hope to have you with me on the next episode.